Senator Rothfuss? Senator Salzar?
He's excused, he's defending a bill in another committee.
And-
He'll be back.
Great. Chairman Scott?
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Committee, we'll get started. I've got a few remarks I want to make. First, let's see. Thing turned on. LSO, are you functioning? Are we live on the video?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Good, there's the extra copies of the amendments. Thank you, Lavelle. The plan this morning generally is we'll make a few opening remarks here. Then we will throw it open to public testimony. After public testimony, we will go through and explain this set of amendments being passed out right now. And if we have any others, we'll explain them too. And we'll see if there's another opportunity for public testimony or not. I don't know whether there will be. We might vote on amendments this morning if it goes a lot faster, and I think it will. But we will not take final vote on the bill until Wednesday, and we will accept further amendments on Wednesday. So if any committee members have them, Wednesday we will be under time pressure to get it out because the majority leader wants to hear it, or told me he wants to hear it on the floor on Thursday. I suppose that's subject to change, but I've got to assume that's the way we're going to go. Let me say just a few things as to the way I'm looking at this. It seems to me that really education is the most important thing that the Wyoming state government and our local governments do in combination, us and the school districts, K-12 education. And it's really part of our responsibilities, the older generations, to help the younger generation come along so they can get the education they need to function in the modern world. I will say that the bill we're going to consider today is how you finance it. So we're going to be concentrating on the finances today, but they do have implications for how the larger system works. And I think we need to be very conscious of that. And I am persuaded that although our education system is clearly a little better than the national average, that it's not getting the job done the way it should. And the legislature had a report done. It's entitled the 2020 Recalibration of Wyoming's Education Resource Block Grant Model Final Report. Was submitted to us by Picus Odin and Associates in December. And I commend that as reading to the members of the committee and anybody else that's interested. Particularly, I found the introduction to it in the first portion of it extraordinarily interesting. And on the subject of the quality problems we have, let me just read a few things that the consultants told us. On page 3, they say, as shown in Chapter 2, data from the National Assessment of Education Progress, the NAEP, suggest improvements in student performance have not grown at the same pace as growth in revenues for education in Wyoming. And by revenues, they mean essentially the money that's available for the school district to spend. And they have a table on that. And then on page 11, they discuss the changes in Wyoming student achievement and the scores that we've gotten in the YTOP and then the NAEP assessments. And they say, put it differently, the table shows between 44.6 and 46.5% of students perform only at basic level or below in mathematics, and between 50.88 and 45.2% of students perform only at the basic level or below in English language arts. These performance levels are not adequate for graduates to access jobs in the higher skill, higher wage economy Wyoming is trying to build. And they go on to discuss some of that. We do a little better in some than others. And then they talk about the, okay. Well, at least we retained a core.
You did, yeah. Good. We traded out.
Yeah, this is going to be a problem as members have bills in other committees. They discussed that our scores on the national assessment are a little above average. And then they say, moreover, scoring above the US average is not an accomplishment to be touted because most of the policymakers and educators across the country view the US average student performance as being inadequate. So that, I think, sets the stage because we're not only talking about the funding system in this bill, we're talking about the implications that has for how the schools operate. And if we're not getting adequate performance, and it sure sounds like we're not, that is something we're going to have to need to worry about committee as we do this bill and as we do other things throughout the year. And again, I really commend their report to everybody. And then let me just mention one provision in the state constitution. And it's Article 7, Section 9. And Article 7 is the one on school finances. It says, legislature shall make such further provision by taxation or otherwise as with the income rising from the general school fund will create and maintain a thorough and efficient system of public schools, adequate to the proper instruction of youth, et cetera. And I would emphasize the thorough and the adequate have been emphasized, but you look in the Campbell decisions, they cite the whole provision. The Supreme Court's well aware it's there. And part of our constitutional charge is to be efficient. And I think that's a good deal of what we're likely to be talking about today. So with that, I would welcome any comments that the other members of the committee that are here might have. Okay. With that, we'll take public testimony on the whole recalibration bill in general. I will say this bill is, we put it in as a backup bill. The Senate leadership, my understanding is, wants to hear it on the floor. And I am frankly concerned that the other house, by having a bill with both tax increases and reductions in it, may have difficulty passing anything. we'll see. I would prefer to work with a House bill if we get one. So it's not the official recalibration bill. It is very close in some aspects. Matter of fact, the first almost 40 pages are almost word for word with the official recalibration bill, but it does not have the revenue raising measures because it's a Senate file. It cannot have revenue raising measures and does not. And then it has some additional provisions there at the end that were designed to raise the subject, get estimates on what the cost of those things were. So we'd have the basis for amending things as we proceeded further. So with that, anybody here want to comment on the bill and the whole recalibration process? We're open to that. Yes, sir. And forgive me, with masks, I don't always recognize who's coming. And we will, as a matter of formality, ask everybody to identify themselves for the record. Mr. Farmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer with Wyoming School Boards Association. Mr. Chairman, I certainly appreciate the introduction, the gravity of recalibration of school finance and how to approach this. Frankly, I'm surprised this bill is really nothing like anything that was discussed during recalibration or consistent with the recommendations of the consultants in the report to which you referred. So those deviations do concern me. I think if this was something that we had time to talk about, time to dive in, but with an immediacy that you talk about a need to get to the floor by the end of this week, I don't know that we're adequately able to address all of the components, all of the concerns of this bill. Mr. Chairman, there's a few things that I would like to point out with regard to the bill itself, and then just generally to the comments you made about the value of education, the job that we're doing. Also in the report that you referenced with Drs. Pikus and Auden, while they certainly say that Wyoming needs to get better, and that's a reality. In our performance, we need to get better. They also say Wyoming's doing pretty well compared to other states. They say that we are doing better than many other states. Now, there's two things they talk about. They talk about an evidence-based model, which is what they presented, as well as a cost-based model. In their evidence-based model, Drs. Pikus and Auden suggested that if you follow their model, the academic results will follow. So perhaps the indictment on Wyoming performance is an indictment on their model, and perhaps it's a reality that in Wyoming, we can do better with the student performance, and we should do better, and I believe educators strive toward that. That's where we ought to be with education, is getting better. All of our scores, the NAEP scores, the YTOP scores, Wyoming did something other states didn't do. We get to set that cut line on YTOP. We don't set the cut line for NAEP, but on YTOP, on PAWS, on all of the tests Wyoming has, we set the line of what is proficient, and Wyoming has made the decision to set that bar high, and that's a good thing. We want our students to do well, so we've set a high bar. We need to do better, and that is a commitment that Wyoming education has. Mr. Chairman, as to the bill, first of all, generally and then specifically, again, I'm concerned that some of the cuts have not really been vetted. They are contrary in some ways to the recommendations of the consultants, and certainly there's not evidence that these are cost-based measures. They look like measures that are savings oriented. How do we as a state save money? Mr. Chairman, I think there are a number of things in here that may be the prerogative of the legislature while others certainly are concerning. I would like to address specifically transportation and special education. Both of those are capped under this bill. The caps on transportation and the caps on special education are things that we have already done. And through recalibration, they said, you know what, we think we've got a pretty good handle on this right now. They said, we think we've got these things under control, but not only are we capping them, in July 1st of 2023, transportation goes away. That section is repealed. And so the bill as it stands has a transportation system that will no longer exist. Now, certainly it would be a hope that we could replace that transportation system, but the bill as it is now eliminates transportation July 1st, 2023. And that certainly is concerning. A few other places that we have some concerns with, there is a section on page 54 that talks about a 1 million per 80 or 1 million in reductions divided by ADM. And again, this sort of idea of just an arbitrary number set and then a cut that's divided equally among districts is problematic. That notion of just a shared cut at a set dollar figure is not a cost-based approach and would be contrary to the directives of the court and our approach to funding funding education in Wyoming. Mr. Chairman, I would like to also address the notion of taking teachers outside of the discretion of local districts, making it a categorical grant. That removes discretion really from the local district's ability to decide the best way to compensate and to manage education teachers within the district. By removing them, what that actually does is says this is categorical. You get to pay based simply on this line item. Many districts use personnel savings across the board to fund what the model provides as inadequate salaries. The consultants specifically stated in the report, Dr. Stoddard, that salaries that are currently paid, current market salaries, are accurate specifically for teachers. So the model underfunds teacher salaries and then takes away the discretion of local districts to provide for those local salaries. Mr. Chairman, also with regard to a cap on salaries, no salary above $105,000. Again, an area of concern that is inconsistent with markets. It's not lost on me that that is the salary of the governor, 105. Certainly one can take a look at the finances of the state of Wyoming and find a number of state employees that make more than the governor. And I believe the reason for that is that our Wyoming governor is funded at a lower rate, certainly at the discretion of the legislature, in order to ensure that this is a public service. Somebody that is not career-oriented, but here for a time to govern. Mr. Chairman, when it comes to the salaries for governing education, our school board members take a salary of $0. That governance salary is much lower than the governor's. The administration salaries, much like the administration salaries of the state of Wyoming, are consistent with market, not consistent with arbitrary figures. So again, Mr. Chairman, I think there are a number of areas here in the bill where we have these sort of arbitrary numbers that are thrown out. Removal of professional development time. Let's take out 3 days of professional development with no evidence that this provides for a better education system. Meanwhile, the state continues to add requirements that teachers have additional training. Mr. Chairman, I think there's probably a lot of other testimony, so I don't intend to monopolize time. I just wanted to raise a number of the concerns that we see with the bill as it is, and ask you for some deliberation, some time to really get through it, and to talk through it. If this is something that the committee comes back to in the interim, then I think a lot of these ideas could be vetted a lot more fully and search of evidence of whether this is good for education in Wyoming. Mr. Chair, I appreciate the opportunity to comment and would be prepared for questions.
Okay, I'm going to ask the committee to see if any questions. I would say on the time factor, you know, we're under a schedule partly imposed by the Constitution with the deadline on the length of session and the extent we've already used a certain amount of the days in the virtual sessions. I think it's Monday is the last day for bills on general file in the same house. So we're up against it on the deadline. And that's just the way it is this year. Interplay between COVID and our Constitution and what we can do virtually and what we can't. It's a practical matter. So bear with us on that one. I would have liked to have taken a lot more time on this and called in, frankly, some expert witnesses and whatnot and talked to them, but there ain't time. There just isn't. So with that, anybody? Let me ask you a question. Am I right that the principle, you talked about the departures from the model that the consultants recommended. Am I right in thinking that the major departure there in the dollar terms is that we are paying teachers significantly more than the model that is presented by Picus? I haven't,
Picus,
Picus.
Mr. Chairman.
And company. Because there is quite a discrepancy there, is there not?
Mr. Chairman, so there are deviations from current practice and the model of Picus and Auden. And yes, one of the largest is that salaries in the model are underfunded. And so districts take from a block grant to fund salaries at a rate that is consistent with market pressures.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? No, several of your questions raise concerns I think we'll come back to on some of the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Who wants to testify next? Who's next? Yes, sir.
Members, Dennis Holmes, Associate Superintendent, Campbell County. Thank you for this opportunity this morning. Chairman Scott, in some reading last night, was looking at some information, perhaps even I think it was dated from the late 90s, and it talked about defining the basket of goods for the best for every student in Wyoming. It also talked about determining the cost of providing the education to every Wyoming student that they are entitled to. And then it talked about adequately funding the basket. But the sentence that caught me at the end, to me, is probably the most important sentence. It said, make sure there are no losers in the system. And Chairman Scott, as I read through.
Which source are you citing? Excuse me.
It was a document from the produced in the late 90s describing the basket of goods.
Okay.
Thank you. Also, I would echo Mr. Farmer's concerns with possibly increasing class sizes, cuts based on ADM. I've seen other bills or bill drafts talking about holding districts harmless because of the declining enrollments that we've all experienced this year due to the pandemic and certain other economic factors. Grave concerns with teachers coming out of the categorical grant, capping salaries, limiting transportation based on 18-19 numbers and a percentage of that, those expenditures, and then have concerns with limiting special education as well. One other thing that is real evident to me and just something that I continually focus on is the Campbell 2 decision, talking about the financial resources not being an acceptable reason for failure to provide the best adequate educational system. And I just have grave concerns about the possible reductions in the impact on not only the students, but just on all of the different components tied to education throughout Wyoming. And Chairman Scott, I thank you for this opportunity.
Okay. Committee, questions? Let me raise a couple of issues. One, we've heard about special education twice. There will be an amendment later on to remove that. The purpose of the special education was to try to force the acceptance of the Medicaid program because there's been quite a bit of resistance to that. The Appropriations Committee has a bill on that subject because frankly, without doing any harm to what the students are getting, we can get significant reimbursement from the federal government. And that's something we are quite concerned of with today's financial circumstances. So that was the purpose of that. The Appropriations Committee has a bill that's passing in the Senate on that. We decided let them deal with that one for now. That is a financial issue. Who's going to pay? And 49 other states get reimbursed, and we haven't been able to because of our approach to it. So if they can succeed in getting it done, so much the better, and we'll leave that to them for now. So that there will be an amendment on that particular subject. I would caution, you can always make on the subject of the finances. And like your thoughts on this, seems to me you can always make education just a little better by going to the next, stepping down from one class size to the next, all the way to the way the European nobility used to do it with individual tutors. But that's not realistic. Somebody's got to draw a line somewhere.
Chairman Scott, if I may.
Yeah.
Chairman Scott, committee members, based on past experiences, I'd like to comment on your comment on Medicaid. I was in Montana for 26 years, 17 years in administration, and I realize Wyoming is the only state that does not seek reimbursement through Medicaid in the K-12 educational system. And to not mince words, I will tell you that the last 7 years, I'll use the words train wreck, extremely difficult situations going into an IEP and not only having to dealing with the sensitivity and just the overall nature of an IEP. And I say that with all due respect, but in addition to have to ask a parent to sign a document allowing the district to be reimbursed with Medicaid reimbursement was extremely uncomfortable and sometimes quite controversial. I can also say that in a district I was in with nearly 18,000 students, the amount of Medicaid reimbursement was nominal. And it took a number of years to be able to save up any funds to be afforded towards the educational services provided for the students. The other thing that it did is it took away contact time from instructors to students, because instead of having 7.5 hours of potential contact time with students, now the educators were documenting cases and entering information into the computer system for reimbursement. So what might be a 7.5 hour day of contact time with students now became a 5 hour day of contact and 2 hours of documentation. So just some things to think about there, Chairman Scott, and thank you.
Well, I'm sure not an enthusiast for the Medicaid program. The feds have got some regulations there. But it does seem to be something in this financial environment we're going to have to pursue. But I think we'll take care of it in this bill. You can go talk to the Appropriations Committee about their bill.
Certainly, thank you.
But 49 other states seem to have made it work, so. Okay, anything else? No? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Audience, I'm new to this education committee, but my typical pattern has been to call on people who want to volunteer and to do it that way rather than some kind of order or signups. And particularly with the Zoom, where our instructions are to let people who are here in person testify first and the Zoom second, and my inability to see who's here, we're just going to continue to do it that way. So who wants to be next? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, Chairman, Senators. My name is Gail Simmons. I am a blogger with Civics 307, although I am actually testifying just as a citizen. I am from Sheridan. Mr. Chairman, I'm very feel very positive about some of these impacts of changes that you have identified here. I was a member of the Government Efficiency Commission, and one of the personal sore points is the degree to which the recommendations have not been implemented. So on your explanation of changes, I just wanted to point out a few that I find particularly positive. That's providing the model health insurance to funding only. So basically we're paying for actuals. I've got some concerns about reducing student activities. I'll come right back to that. Requiring Medicaid services. And also very important is the consolidation of central office personnel at county level. That we had a regional cost center that we had recommended that is very close to this. Most of my friends know that I come down here and observe what's going on. I received a phone call last week from the woman who operates our ranch. She has 3 grandchildren in school district number 2. And she was so mad when she called. It wasn't about the ranch. It was about why are there 5 principals in Sheridan Junior High? And I had no answer for her, but I went to see what the model says, and I couldn't figure out the model. I could not figure out if it says, based on the number of students, which comes to 852 for 3 classes. I think it falls into a band, but I'm not sure, but it comes to 852. So I couldn't figure if it was supposed to be 2 or 3, but it definitely wasn't 5. So when it calculates to 1.7, I don't know what that indicates. And I didn't realize, I basically have no answer. And my point there is that it is almost impossible to wade through this model and try to get any kind of understanding of how it is being implemented against how it's being funded. I had previously, in order to try to understand, make a comparison, I basically had a hypothesis. My hypothesis was that Sheridan County School District 2 is better managed than most. Whether that's true or not, it was just a hypothesis. And I went to the data. I'm a data geek as well as a civics geek. And I could not prove or disprove it. I spent hours pulling data from the Wyoming Department of Education site, and there is a ton of data. Data is not transparency and it is not accountability until it is provided in such a way that you can make evaluations. It's just numbers being barfed out onto reports. I think there's some really great ones there, and there are some good reports. What I was looking for is what does the model have for number of individuals and costs, and what is the actual? And I wanted to be able to see that at the district level, not because I thought we should force it down, but in order to have the conversation. Why for me to show up at School District 2, since I pay taxes, and say, I just want to understand why. If you've got a good reason, I'm good with that. But if I, who can spend hours because I'm retired and because I'm a geek, can't figure this out, how the heck can any other individual has to make a living figure it out? So that really, really bothers me, this lack of transparency. One of the things that I did do, this was off of 2018, was I made a comparison. I took all 20 or all 48 of the districts, broke them down, took the numbers that were out there on what their actuals were, not against the model, but what their actuals were. And I broke it into 4 groups based on the number of ADMs, because I don't think it makes sense to compare School District 3, which is in one quartile, with School District 2, which is in another, and School District 1, all in Sheridan.
Okay. Can you just, for those of us who are not from Sheridan
Yes.
County, enlighten us as to which district is which
Sure.
number? We tend to know them by
So
where they
School
are.
District 1 is the combination of Bighorn and Tongue River. It's in a unique position because the geography keeps it from being combined. You literally have to come to Sheridan and then go back out. School District number 2 is Sheridan. School District number 3 is Claremont. So when I made these comparisons, I wanted to be able to see them by size, because that just makes sense to me. And again, some statistics and quartiles. So in looking at these, I did a comparison of their costs and their responses. And what I saw is Sheridan 2, which is in the first quartile, Sublet 1, which is in the second, and Bighorn 2, which is in the third, all have the highest, those are the 3 highest across the state, regardless of the districts. So what I'm taking from this is there's a requirement to provide an equitable level of education. And while the funding model purports to do that, the results do not show that. So whether we talk about it's costing too much or not costing enough, we're not providing, I cannot believe that we are providing the same level of education in Jackson that we are in Sundance. It just, nothing I can find actually presents that. So on your recommendations, one of the things that I was looking at before seeing yours was that you take the lesser of actual or state on the health insurance. I realize that that is being used, this so-called phantom teachers, to fund some, but I would still like to know what the actual is. And I would propose that the minimum necessary cuts or adjustments be made in the model until legislature causes to be done what I believe is your responsibility. And that is the basket of goods. And it has not been addressed. It has not been revised for decades. And so when I listen in and I hear that the driver of the costs of classroom is the basket of goods, my question is, why aren't we looking at the basket of goods? Are we in fact teaching the things that our students need to have? Maybe we are, but we don't know because it's been years. It hasn't been looked at. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that Section 9, thorough and efficient and adequate, because I keep hearing about Campbell 2 and we never hear about Campbell 4. And so when I take a look at this, and again, I wanted to come back to the activities. So I had to take my evaluation, and I did this in 2018, of actuals against the overall, and again by quartile. So I could do a high and low within quartile. And what I found interesting is that the percentage of the total funds that were spent just for activities alone ranged from 1.5% from one of the school districts in Fremont County to 7.9% in Sheridan School District 2. Well, I believe that there is a place for activities, but I also believe that when everything else is said and done, we have to put a fence around what happens in the school, and we need to make sure that we are paying our teachers well, that we are getting good teachers, and that all of the other items, all of the overhead, the administration, I believe activities are important because they are part of education, but we have to take a look at what that centerpiece is first. I've got lots of data from 2018. My biggest problem is this. I cannot compare for any district. I could not figure out how they were putting their money against what they had provided. So I don't know if they're doing well or they're doing poor, and I doubt that anybody else can tell as well. And we are required to have a single education system. I believe that was the bottom line from the Campbell decisions, with local control to some degree. So lots of that to unpack. I'll be happy to provide some of this data, but it's really, my point is, do the least harm that you can here. And oh, by the way, use those reserve funds. I keep hearing about if we cut money, we're going to take it from the students. Well, if that happened, then how did they get all this money in the reserves? Why didn't that go to the students? So that is another area, is to have them use their reserves to make up the difference, while to Mr. Farmer's point, take the next interim. Let's take a look at the basket of goods. Let's force a comparison between actuals to model so that there can be some visibility to what is actually going on. And I stand for questions.
Committee, questions? Let me ask and comment on a few of the points you raised. You raise a fundamental point on the basket of goods and what our requirements are there.
Yeah.
I do not know why the recalibration committee did not get into that, or if they did get into it. They didn't show in what they did. And Senator Rafis, who's off defending a bill elsewhere, is the only one of us on the committee that was on that recalibration. I think I would say I share some of your concerns with the basket of goods. And I think, committee, that's going to be something that we need to deal with at length in the coming year or two. I'm concerned, frankly, I'm a little too concerned that it's become so inclusive that they've lost the focus on some of the fundamentals, and that's a real problem. And I have all along in my legislative career, the past, well, not all along, I would say the past 20 years at least, been quite concerned about the failures in teaching reading in the early grade. And those, in spite of legislative action in the past, those are persisting. And that is a major concern for me. So I have concerns about that basket, but it was not addressed, as near as I can tell, in the recalibration. So for this one, I'm afraid we're going to have to focus mostly on making the existing system a good deal more efficient. And then I wasn't quite clear the point you are making on the activities. Now that's both athletics and some of the things like debate and some of those things. Are you saying that some of the districts are underemphasizing it? Or are you saying that some of the districts have let it get out of hand?
Mr. Chairman, I'm saying that from a calculated amount, without looking at the actuals because I couldn't get to it, it would appear that there is a lack of parity, whether it's too far under in some cases or too far above in others. I could not say for sure, but I do know that overall, I believe it's somewhere around 2.7% at the statewide. No, it's 3.6% statewide. So, you know, that's a huge variation. And so it was more to point out that just in this one, you can see this large variation. And there may be some reasons for SCSD2. They've got 2 high schools, which means they have 2 football teams. I think they have 2 debate teams. So there may be some reasons for it. But when you look at it specifically, it's like, why is it so low in that Fremont district? I forget which one it is, but it's Fremont 38, which I expect is maybe on Wind River.
Yeah.
But so it's not, there's not enough data, Mr. Chairman, to say what they are. That's why my problem with not being able to do a comparison. I'm simply saying that I believe the legislature needs to do whatever it can to at least address those costs that they can see, allow for the use of those reserve accounts to pick up some differences, and then go hard at it to identify, one, how do you do comparisons in the interim? So I'm basically saying do as least harm as you can from a fiscal position. But I will tell you that after years in the Navy and at General Electric, money does not equal quality. You can throw money all day long and still have a less than wonderful product. So I reject that idea that more money equals better quality. Money spent the right way equals better quality.
Senator Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, just clarification, that is Arapahoe School District, Fremont 38.
Okay. Are they were just an elementary district. Do they now have a high school?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure of that. I'll check that.
Okay. Mr. Caria, can you answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, they're a K-8.
They're a K-8 district. Okay,
Which
that may
makes
be
sense.
the explanation, and that the activities are more expensive in the model at the high school level. If they're a K-8 district, you would expect them to be on the low side. So
Mr. Chairman,
that appears to be a rational deviation from the main.
And Mr. Chairman, that's exactly my point on having to work with high level percentages rather than comparisons.
Yeah, I would say the legislature has found the model to be quite difficult because it is so complicated as we try to capture all the nuances. And all I can say to that is you should have seen its predecessor.
Mr. Chairman,
This was a great simplification, as I remember, just as a lay member of the legislature, not in the education committee. The predecessor model was much more difficult to follow. And I think I see some agreement in the audience on that point.
Mr. Chairman, I had asked another legislator, a representative, about my inability to determine this. And the response was, well, we do better than most states on this comparison. And my immediate thought was, well, that just means we stink less.
Okay. Okay, committee, anything further? Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, Janine Bateski from Teton County. I wasn't going to testify this morning, but I think I need to put some clarity. You know, Gail did a really nice job of laying out some of the issues, right? One of the issues is, and this has been one of the things that I've been stating for a long time, is look at the complexity. She's complaining about trying to pull data out. Think about the poor people that have to put the data in. These are not reports that the school districts generate. These are reports that are generated at the state level. I have a dream. My dream is I'm going to hire Senator Salazar. I'm going to fill out this piece of paper on Senator Salazar. I'm going to put that piece of paper in the system, and it's going to feed all of these reports in a way in which people can then mine the data back out of the reports. That is not the system in which we are encumbered. There's this report that Gail was referring to, which is the Kruger report. It is extremely complex. It's fed by a bunch of different reports, including the fine cutting of how we classify our employees and so on and so forth. So she's right. It's really hard to dig the data out. It's not the district's fault. We do what we're told to do. It comes from the state that way. So, you know, you want to clean up and simplify the system, let's start at the top and, you know, clean up the reports. Secondly, the question on the basket of goods. I'll just tell you, this is my 5th recalibration. In 2017, we did a recalibration. Who was it, Brian? APA? APA was the consultant. They were brought in. They actually did do some work on the basket of goods and compared our basket of goods here in Wyoming against other surrounding states and competing states, and found that our basket of goods was basically in line with other states. To do the basket of goods correctly is an elephant. It would take a great deal of time to do it. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be done. I think it should. You know, if we really want to address what the cost of education is, you've got to start with what you're asking for. What you're asking for is defined in the basket of goods, right? So I just, like I said, it's a huge project to be done correctly. Special ed. Special ed is an interesting one to me. And I keep, and maybe, you know, and please don't suggest that I'm in support of the administration that's in place in Washington, but I have heard rumblings that they are a lot more receptive to IDEA. If you take special ed or IDEA funding, that was put in place in the 70s, the 1970s. The commitment from the federal government at that time was that they were going to fund it 40%. We presently receive somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15%. There's a huge opportunity there, bigger actually than Medicaid, for the feds to step up and do their fair share. So there are opportunities. You started your discussion with talking about you didn't think the House bill had any traction, would get any traction in the Senate as a result of having revenue in it. I personally don't want to see more taxes, but I also realize that we've been dependent upon oil and gas for a long time. Those funds are not available now. How do we put stability into this system so that it's basically a three-pronged approach? We put efficiencies into the system, we look at the present saving streams that are in place, and we put some revenue in place. Because otherwise, we're going to be back here next year having the same discussion, because unless oil and gas come back pretty strong, which I don't think any of us think they will, that's what's going to happen. Class size. I'm a little worried that, and Senator Scott, I think, you know, your district was one of them that got a bunch of these, is we built a bunch of elementary schools based on a 16-to-1 class size. I'm not a facilities guy, so I can't tell you what the impact would be to put 4 more students in each one of those classrooms.
I will speak to that very briefly. I discussed that issue with the chairman of the Senate chairman of the School Facilities Committee, and he tells me they're building them such they will accommodate a much larger class size if need be. They've tried to avoid being just totally inflexible. So I don't have a concern on that point.
All in all, all due respect, but I really feel the House bill is a lot more balanced. I think it puts reductions in place, which frankly, I don't want to see reductions, but I understand the reality of where we are. So, I appreciate you taking the time to go through this. I honestly need to go through, now that I have copies of it, I need to go through and study it more. But, and hopefully you'll offer us an opportunity to testify again.
Yeah.
So I thank you.
We'll try. Let me comment on one thing. I made some remarks at the beginning. My concern on the House bill, frankly, is that they have two subjects in the same bill. The revenue raising and the adjustments to model. And I'm afraid they're going to get the opponents of both ganging up on them and make it impassable. There's some possible state constitutional concerns on that too. Can't happen in the Senate bill because we're not allowed to have a revenue raising provision as per the Constitution.
Correct. I understand.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
And do you have else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the class size issue, the last time I looked at it, we have 16-1, that's the goal. But the actuals, my recollection was it was more like 19-1. And so when we say, these classes were all built for 16-1, but then you hear the stats of what's actually happening in the classrooms, that they are 19-1. I think that's where we, correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the last time. I'm trying to pull up the crew report right now, but that was my understanding.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, thank you for that question. That's a great question. This is what happens when you talk about averages. And I don't, you're averaging districts, you're averaging schools within a district. So each school, each district is different. So I really can't.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ellis.
just anecdotally, just watching my kids' experience, they're in a small school, an old building, tiny classroom. Depending on the year, I see 2 kindergarten classes or 1 kindergarten class. And my son's always been in a bit of a bubble. His lower elementary grades at 20 kids or more per class. And so I appreciate your point, but I also just wanted to make that point when we were talking about space and adequacy, that's kind of happening already.
Yeah, I know. I understand, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I understand. I mean.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Representative, I think Representative Simpson is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, it's nice to be with you today. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I commend you for taking the $100 million lump sum cut and trying to finish what the recalibration committee was doing, and that is to literally recalibrate some of the components. There are many of us that believe the $100 million lump sum figure would be in a weak position when it comes to actual costs on the ground if it was to be litigated. So I think you're on the right step to calibrate. For your information, in a memorandum issued by our legal counsel at LSO, discussing the Campbell 2 case, quote, the court also held that use of past statewide average expenditures to estimate the cost of education was appropriate. Most of the calibration components that you have in front of you today is just that. It's comparing literally what's going on out in the field and adjusting accordingly. With that said, Senators, you've handed out a summary sheet of the proposed amendment to the audience today. There's 2 sides to it. As near as I can tell, the difference between the 2 sides is 1 line item. And that is down on line 10. One of the proposals is to increase teacher salaries by 10%. It's easy during a financial crisis to review the components and select the ones that are out of whack on the negative side, and just because we need to balance the budget and need to deal with that deficit. But I would submit to you that one of the most glaring components that is out of whack is the teacher salary. We're roughly paying, or the districts have testified they need to pay higher salaries in order to obtain and retain quality teachers. And they're literally paying roughly 15% more than what our model provides. Your amendment item number 10 increases that up by $50 million you're adding to the model. That's the wrong direction for those that need to balance the budget, but it is the right thing to do. For those listening, I think it's important to throw out a couple statistics. The model pays for an average salary, $54,482. That's what the model pays on an average. The current salaries being paid out is $59,774. That's the average salary in the field being paid out. This 10% increase doesn't get all the way up to the 59, but it does make it that the average salary would be $57,364. So we're bringing that salary model, salary range up. I think it's the appropriate thing to do, even though it is counter to your objective of realizing there's a budget crisis. So I encourage you to use the side of the sheet in your notes that actually includes 10 to, let's bring those teacher salaries. By the way, that is consistent with the 2020 study. The increase there of 10% is consistent. In fact, many of your items that you've selected to put in terms of recalibrating are consistent with the recommendations of the consultant. So what you do with each of those items is up to you. I trust the good senators. You make good decisions. I just wanted to emphasize to you those 2 points. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. And we did on a few occasions steal some of your work, and I'm very appreciative you're willing to share what you've gotten done. So thank you very much. Committee, questions? Okay, how many more do we have that are going to want to testify? I'm starting to watch the clock. One here. LSO, how many do we have in the waiting room that want to testify?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, two people.
2 people?
Three
Okay.
people. 3 people, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're going to ask people to be relatively brief, but we aren't in trouble yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Cindy Delancey. I'm the president of the Wyoming Business Alliance. I too also had the privilege and honor of serving on the Government Efficiency Commission as an appointee by Governor Mark Gordon. So I have a lot to say this morning. I will keep my remarks short, but it's just a continuation of a very complex and challenging discussion. And having worked in the Capitol now for the past 15 years, one takeaway for me is when everybody's upset or mad, it's usually time to maybe take a hard look at something. And in this situation, we have the education community isn't happy, the business community isn't happy, the parents aren't happy. It's probably time that we continue to get serious about what we're doing as far as funding our K-12 education. Heeding the words from Governor Gordon, State of the State, Wyoming has relied on a funding model that is no longer sustainable, and the handwriting is on the wall. Now, do I come before you today and say that this proposed bill is the answer? I don't know. But what I do know is that we must do something different. Listening again to the words of our wise chief executive is that we've been driving 80 miles an hour with the cruise control while on an icy road. We're headed for a really bad outcome if we don't take the reins on this topic. This is probably, if not the most important work that this body will do this session. And I just continue to implore you to find ways to simplify. I think Ms. Simmons' testimony really nailed it. I've been a practicing member of the Wyoming Bar coming up on 20 years this May. I can't make heads or tails of this. This is my job to try to figure this out. I consider myself to be a relatively intelligent, attentive person, and the complexity related to what's going on related to K-12 funding is, I feel, far beyond the reach of the average Wyoming citizen to be able to meaningfully contribute and participate. So having said that, I come before you as a leader in the business community where the businesses are the end users of our education system. We are the ones that are hiring our graduates, and our hope is to hire Wyoming graduates. But I consistently hear from my membership that we can do better. We need to do better to make sure that we have a prepared and ready workforce to be able to meet the needs and challenges of the 21st century. We have some room for improvement there. I'm pleased to hear that there's agreement with the education community on the need for simplification, and I appreciate Ms. Teskey's comments to us this morning. I also agree with her that the basket of goods correctly analyzed will be a monumental task. However, this is something that we must do. I think this is truly where we've gone off the rails. In all of our Campbell decisions, we've had a 20-year discussion starting with Washakie. The assumption that the court has made, and I can sit here and spout to you all the language from the decisions. The court envisioned the basket to be a constantly evolving and changing concept that wasn't just set in stone and then relegated to the executive branch for implementation. This is your responsibility as the legislature to continue to give due regard and care to create and define an education that's appropriate for the times. Our times are changing. The court has been discussing this topic for 20 plus years. We need to continue to research and look and do that heavy lift, as Ms. Teskey indicated, as far as getting it right. Not just spending 5 minutes in a committee meeting. We need to have a conversation amongst our citizens about what we want education to be and how we can situate our next generation workforce to be best equipped to be able to have jobs in Wyoming. We spent a lot of time in this building talking about ways that we can continue to provide opportunity for our youth. And I know you'll agree with me that Wyoming's been awful good to all of us sitting in this room. And if we do not act now and take that heavy lift, those opportunities that have been afforded to us in this room today might not look the same for our next generation of children. And I just think that it's incredibly important that we continue to do as the court tells us. And I just want to put to bed right now that anyone that tells you that education requires a blank check to fund at all costs, that's not what the court has said. That, Campbell 2, Campbell 1, Campbell 4, these cases are designed to be read together. Not one of them overrules any of them, but that you can see in the rationale of the court that there has been, a real departure as far as the way that the court, has talked about some of these issues. And it is no secret that lack of funds is not an excuse for failure to fund education. It cannot be the basis for reducing the quality of education provided. However, the legislature is the body tasked with determining what an appropriate education is for the times and how to fund it. The court's role is to ensure that the legislature performs its constitutional duties, but the court will not and should not substitute its policy preferences for the legislature. Further, nothing in the cases prohibit the legislature from reducing education funding if market forces, change in techniques, or efficiencies reveal a way to provide the same quality of education at a lower cost. Senator Scott started us out this morning reminding what our Constitution requires of us, and that is thorough and efficient system. And so I think, I come before you today, I know we have a short-term situation ahead of us as far as what do we do about recalibration. We need to recalibrate, but really I also implore you to really think about that long-term solution so we're not constantly back here, having these tense and difficult discussions with people that should be our partners and colleagues, us all rowing the boat in the same direction as far as what we do long-term. Our recalibration statute, and my hypothesis, we heard about Ms. Simmons' hypothesis, but mine is our recalibration statute 2113-3092 needs some modernization as well. It only speaks to the recalibration, the recosting essentially. And I think all of us can agree that if we're doing the same thing now, it's going to cost more in 5 years. That's a simple basic business principle. I think that if we could modernize our language in our statutes and give clear guidance to future legislators that our educational K-12 funding discussion encompasses a two-step process. Number one, we have to ask ourselves, is this the education we want? Is it the best it can be under the times? And once that answer has occurred, meaning, is the basket necessary and appropriate for the times, that's when we shift to what the delivery of the cost of the education that the legislature has defined should be, not just simply skipping over step one and moving right to step two. I think that's kind of what, in my hypothesis, is what causes this conundrum at time. We did ask for the basket to be part of the scope of work for the consultants during this recalibration process, and unfortunately, the request to expand the scope of the contract was denied by management. Council when requested in November or December 2020. But again, we have the issue before us, which again, I believe this bill tries to address, as well as what do we do long term. And I'm happy to be part of this conversation. I want to come to you with solutions, and it just would be, I look forward to the day where we can all lock arms and move forward for the best interests of our next generation of workforce and our Wyoming children. So with that, I just wanted to also add one thing too, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bring my personal experience in this, but I am the parent of a special needs child. And as far as the conversation about special education funding, I'm more than happy to sign a form to allow the district to get reimbursement back. That's not uncomfortable for me. It's something I would gladly do. I'll do anything to help the district to be able to recoup funds, to be able to provide the best level of education for my child when in school. I don't see that as a burden or anything. So I just really appreciate the work of the JAC as far as trying to figure out how we cannot be one of 49 other states that don't seek funding, in this reimbursement partnership with the federal government. I think it's something that we can do. And just to give you some firsthand experience as a parent in this process, I'm more than happy to do my part as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much. I know this is a difficult task, and I'm happy to entertain any questions from the committee.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is that exhausted the people that are here? Yes, no? Representative? Can I say a few things, please? Certainly, come to the microphone and identify yourself.
Thank you, Chairman and Board. Appreciate being here and being able to speak to you. I've been to numerous board meetings, school board meetings.
Can you tell us, just for the record, who you are?
Okay, my name is Representative Bill Fortner. I'm from Campbell County. My district is District 52.
Okay, thank
I
you.
represent everybody from Gillette to the Montana line over to Crook County and then Johnson County line. Take in a pretty good area there, not a lot of people. But anyhow, I see two things that's really strangling the state of Wyoming. And I believe number one is we're way too much government. I believe that there's proof of that. There's documentation. The second is the school system is growing to be massive. And the two things, or the three things that I see that's blocking us restructuring the school system is the basket of goods, the funding, and the Constitution. I believe if we address the Constitution first, it'll take care of the other two. And I believe to do that, if we have to, we go back and we do a constitutional amendment to restructure the basket of goods and the funding. I believe it's that simple. I believe we need to do it, and we need to do it immediately. I believe all the mechanisms in place, the founding fathers give that ability to us to do that when we need to do that. With that being said, I don't want to take much more of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Me? Thank you very much. LSO, who have we got in the waiting room? Let's admit them, and folks, we're going to have to start being relatively succinct here.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, it looks like we have 3 members of the public. If anybody else wants to testify, please raise your yellow virtual hand and I'll promote you into the room. There's 4 people, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, pick somebody and let's go.
All right, Mr. Mullen, you were first, so go ahead and start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Tate Mullen. I'm the Government Relations Director for the Wyoming Education Association. At the end of the day, the model that needs to be produced, we have to remember it has to be cost-based, evidence-based, and more importantly, it has to show that it benefits the students of Wyoming. Currently, this bill does not meet those standards. We feel that there are a couple of pieces that we're really concerned about, whether it's $1 million in cuts, whether it's $100 million in cuts for ADM. The fact of the matter is that those types of cuts are arbitrary and capricious. You know, we're not addressing on how to provide an equitable and adequate education, finding efficiencies. These are merely cuts and hoping for the best. And we do have concerns with those. We also have concerns with the caps on special education, as well as transportation and the elimination of transportation funding. In terms of moving teacher salaries outside of the block grant, I was curious as to the logic of why we would do that. There was some discussion by Representative Simpson earlier about the level of salaries that we have in terms of model, actual, and in the Picus and Odd report, what our competitiveness has looked like with our surrounding states. You know, we don't support moving those salaries outside of the block grant. Those local districts know what it takes to attract and retain the type of educators they need to fill those positions. As is, if we move those salaries outside of the block grant and we funded those at the model salary as is right now, that is a substantial cut for those teachers. If this was something that was going to move forward, it should be at actual salary level with a guarantee of an increase for a inflation adjustment on a yearly basis. That way we can rebuild our competitive edge in terms of attracting and retaining and keep that moving forward. In terms of student performance, our graduation rates are up. Our NAEP scores are good. We went from 6th to 5th, best in the West for several years running. And let's talk about what that spending does. No, there is not a one-to-one correlation between what you spend in education and what the outcomes are. And that was even noted in the Picus and Otten report, was that the idea that we're going to spend more money and we're going to end up with the same amount of return on investment in terms of performance is impossible. It's literally impossible to do. But there is evidence that does show what education funding does for students. So it does impact low-income students disproportionately. It really benefits those low-income students in terms of their achievement, their high school graduation rates, and their employment afterwards. Funding directly impacts the quality of education. So it doesn't impact the performance, but what it does, because those dollars are directly correlated to salaries, and the number and quality of teachers in the classroom absolutely impact our student performance. And if we cut those dollars, we are cutting the types and quality of teacher that we have in the classroom. Education funding doesn't just impact the school, it impacts our communities as well. So a few quick facts about education funding and the economy in the state of Wyoming specifically. When education funding is increased, home values and personal income go up while crime and poverty rates decline. Cutting education funding results in higher crime rates, higher poverty rates, a decrease in personal income, and a decline in home values. Money invested in public education generally stays within that community, keeping more money in our state. Increasing taxes to support increased spending on education results in more jobs created than more jobs lost due to tax cuts. Increased funding for education is shown to result in higher graduation rates, higher wages statewide. By investing in education and improving student outcomes, graduates can secure higher paying jobs, which means they will contribute more to our state's economy during their lifetimes. And finally, research shows that children of parents with higher paying jobs, which are attained through education, are less likely to rely on food stamps or welfare. This is the sort of beneficial cycle of education that can change lives for the better and boost our state's economy at the same time. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to address the question of why exclude this as a categorical grant or a categorical exclusion to the block grant model. I think our intention is, and our concern is that any kind of reduction that we provide in education, we're going to see cuts to teachers' salaries. We're going to see cuts to popular teachers. And, you know, at the end of the day, people are going to blame the legislature for that. And I think that we all recognize the value of having high quality teachers. I certainly do. And that's why I support this particular language. I want to make sure that as districts are facing very difficult, challenging times, that teachers aren't being cut first. And in my own district, I can share with you that I know a question was circulated among teachers. Would you support a 10% reduction in your salary? At the same time, I sent a letter to my district saying, you know, we're getting a new superintendent. Would you be willing to look at reductions in those salaries to better align the $200,000 salary that we've priorly allocated for that to something more in line with the model? And I was told no. So that's my concern on that language, and that's why that's there. And I think it's our intention, and I can't speak for everyone in the legislature, but that would be an area that we always make sure we're funding and looking at adjustments when it comes to cost of living and whatnot. You know, Mr. Mullen, I do have a question though, and one thing I'd like to, it's a little outside this discussion, but just want to have the conversation with you going forward is we've looked at an analysis of what it costs to fund education, but one thing that's been missing for years is, are we doing it efficiently? To my recollection in my time in the legislature and everything I've read, we've never had that question. Are we doing this efficiently? And we have an obligation in our Constitution. It says that in our taxation statute for education, it must be efficient. And to my recollection, are you aware of any studies along those lines? And before you answer that, let me just preface it by saying, when I visit with teachers in my district, I talk about this concern over efficiencies. Is there a way we can, you know, be more mindful of how we use our dollars? And teachers have examples. And every time I start making a list, it always comes with this caveat of, please don't tell anyone I told you. I'm worried about losing my job. And so I am really concerned when I've heard that dozens of times. And I can tell you, I've asked numerous times. I brought this as an example. We're not allowed to use props on the floor. But in 1 year, I threw these books away. These are beautiful science books purchased by my kids' school district that are completely empty, and they're sent home at the end of the year. And I ask, why are these empty? Why are we buying these if we're not using them? And every time I ask teachers, you know, have you approached the district? You know, why do we buy these things if we're not even using them? There's concern out there about voicing concern over how we're spending district dollars. And I have other examples. This is just one. And this is just 1 year for 3 kids. So that's my question, Mr. Mullen. Like, are we, you know, aside from the discussion we're having on this bill, but related to it, do we have strong whistleblower protection statutes in place that protect your members from expressing their concerns to their district administrators of how we can be more efficient with tax dollars? And so that's my question is, can we have are you aware of an efficiency study that I'm missing? And then can we do a better job of allowing our teachers to voice their concerns to their district leadership?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I appreciate the question. In terms of efficiencies, other than studies, other than the Pikus and Auden report, I'm not aware of any. I would say, and I'd reiterate some of the comments that we have heard here earlier, is that, you know, your example of these textbooks are some of the other things that we look at on the periphery when we hear these recommendations from our educators in terms of finding efficiencies. I feel that those are kind of pecking at the edges, right? They are there. We can look at them. We can find those. We can listen to our educators and figure out where those are at. But really, again, I think this comes back to if we want to be very, very productive with this, we need to look at the basket of goods, and that is going to be an incredible lift. We would support looking at the basket of goods. We think that is something that needs to be done, and we think that that is probably where you're going to find ways to make that an efficient. Now, I think we need to be very careful, and efficient does not necessarily mean a mechanism to cut. It just means that we're going to be able to provide an adequate and equitable education for an appropriate cost. In terms of those whistleblower protections, that is probably a question that is better answered by our president, who I know is online and in the waiting room to testify.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman, I don't want to, just to follow up, I don't want to go down that path. Our time is limited today, but as a request to you, I would like to work closely with your association to understand those laws. And when I hear that from so many friends of mine that teach, please don't tell anyone I told you this. I'm afraid of losing my job. This is part of our charge, is to look for efficiencies. And I know that textbooks, in the grand scale of a $1.5 billion budget probably doesn't add up to a lot, but it's part of our duty. And if we're not willing to look for efficiencies on textbooks, then what says, I don't have any assurance that we're looking for efficiencies elsewhere where there are bigger dollars. And so it's part of a larger effort. So just please know, we can visit offline, but that is one area of concern that I continually have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Further? Okay, LSO, who have we got next?
Mr. Grady, Hutchinson.
Okay, Mr. Grady?
Good morning, Chairman Scott. I'm Grady Hutcherson, President of the Wyoming Education Association and a classroom teacher for the past 24 years. So I hope to bring a unique perspective to the conversation with you all this morning, and I appreciate the work that you all have been doing, that you will continue to do. And we can all easily agree that this is a very complex and complicated topic. During my 24 years in the classroom, I can tell you firsthand many answers to questions that continue to be asked. Unfortunately, this process regularly leaves out our classroom teachers and our support professionals from the conversation. So you all are left to make decisions without the input from the actual experts who are working in the schools day in and day out. I want to bring to you a little bit of a perspective related to the salaries and this idea of moving them outside of the model. During my 24 years of teaching in Goshen County, I also served on our interest-based negotiations team. That was the team that worked collaboratively to look at what the needs of the district were so that we could attract highly qualified employees and classroom teachers to our district so that we could also retain and keep those employees. We actually, I believe, made history in the state of Wyoming because we had invited the previous Senator Meyer, who now is State Treasurer Meyer, to participate in that collaborative process so that he could see firsthand how cuts at the legislative and state level negatively impact students in classrooms. Education has been cut repeatedly. We have made a system that is more efficient, and we are now to the point where any additional cuts will harm our students. So I easily could provide a lot more testimony. I know that time is short, but I also want to point out a couple of other things. Teacher voices and education employee voices were included in the process with professional judgment panels during the Picus and Auden recalibration. So I think we do need to listen to what was shared and what is in that report. There was a conversation earlier this morning, for example, about class size and changing that. I can tell you firsthand, if you want to see how you have to turn sideways and shimmy through a 3rd and 4th and 5th grade classroom at Trail Elementary in Torrington, Wyoming, I'm sure they would be happy to have you. They can't fit any more students into the rooms that they already have. So we have to think very carefully about unintended consequences. And I also want to point out one other thing. The report from Picus and Auden showed how we could have a positive impact on student achievement. For example, looking at things like the tutors, the instructional facilitators, and that's just one example, but then it appears that the legislature apparently doesn't like some of those components, so they start to cherry pick what is and isn't part of the model, and that has a direct impact on student achievement as well. So I appreciate all of the good work that you are doing. I will stop there and stand for any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee.
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. Certainly I wouldn't classify the work that we've been doing here as cherry picking things we like and things we don't like. Our obligation is to look at the Constitution, what we're required to provide, and a big part of that is looking at the basket of goods and the delivery of our education system. And so I just want to clarify that this wasn't a random things we like, things we don't like. I think we've consulted amongst each other with our attorneys, with others who have studied the Campbell cases. As an attorney, this is something I take very seriously. This was not a cherry picking exercise. This was looking at ways that we could continue to deliver our obligation that's required under our Constitution with our existing basket of goods with the least amount of harm to student performance. So I just wanted to make that point, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The question I'm going to have, you mentioned cuts, and I'm going to ask you, what are you talking about? I have here a document prepared by the Legislative Service Office entitled Historical Wyoming K-12 Education Funding and Enrollment. Goes back to 1979 to their estimate for the school years 2021 and 2022. The expenditures per student, I see, well, let's just take the period since the Campbell 1 decision. I see one reduction. That was from 2017 to 2018, and it was a grand total of $278, I believe, if I'm doing my math right on the spur of the moment, went from 16,212, and this does not include federal funds, to 15,934. Everything else is a steady increase. We see from overall in the year of the Campbell decision, which was school year 1996, the Campbell decision was in November of that school year. We spent that year $5,168 per student. We are right now at $15,966 per student. That doesn't sound like cuts to me at all. And the same thing applies to the total funding. What are you talking about in the way of cuts, previous cuts? I don't see them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I will follow up the best that I can. Some of the great testimony we have heard this morning is, in fact, how complicated this model is. We know that, for example, there were cuts because of a reduction with the external cost adjustment. So depending on how you look at the funding model, it sounds to me like you're looking at the overall numbers, which may or may not take into account student enrollment, for example. And those, according to the information I have, there were $77 million in 2017, another $8 million in 2018. In 2019, the ECA resulted in a $19.3 million reduction. So those were the general references that I was making, Chairman Scott. And if I may also follow up with Senator Ellis for clarification, please.
Okay. You had some further follow-up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, I just wanted to clarify. I know words are so important, and when I use the phrase cherry picking and the example that I use with instructional facilitators, I apologize if the term cherry picking is not the correct term to use. My point was, when we look at the report from PICUS, people very quickly start choosing components that they agree with, that they disagree with, or maybe they're neutral on. And I was using the example of the instructional facilitators as one of the very controversial examples that I've witnessed. And so then, for example, if that's not kept in the model, or the funding for that, or the number of positions is changed compared to what was in the model, that was what I was referring to. So I apologize for using that term. I don't know what other term would better explain that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Ellis.
Maybe, Mr. Chairman, just for the record and our discussion here, when we talk about choosing components, there was a time where we funded above what the consultants recommended, and they called that the legislative model. And so when we started seeing our budget problems, we thought, we had some extra cash that we decided to throw in education, looked at instructional facilitators. And I visited with people in my schools. There are people who think they're great, others who don't think they're worth their value, because those teachers that were tapped to serve as instructional facilitators thought they were better in the classroom rather than roaming and providing support. So I get that there's controversy over that. I think the reason that you saw some of those components being targeted was because, and this was a big discussion during the recalibration, of which I didn't serve but listened to many of the hearings, was the alignment. We fund for education facilities, how many school districts were utilizing them. And if there wasn't that correlation, I think that was a reason that was maybe targeted as an element, was because even though we pay for them, maybe we're not getting them used or used fully as we anticipated in the model. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I'm going to take also issue on the taking enrollment changes into account. The per student figures explicitly do that. And I will apologize. I did miss one other reduction from school year 2013 to 2014. The per student figure went down from $15,137 to $15,078. That would be a decline of $59 per student on a $15,000 per student. That's the other one that's there. We don't have a record of cuts here. So, committee? Okay, who else have we got, Alice? So we're running out of time.
We have Mr. Boyd Brown.
Mr. Boyd Brown.
Chairman Scott, Boyd Brown, Superintendent, Laramie County School District number 1. Just want to say just a couple things. As far as reports being out there, the crew report is out there. The crew report shows what we are given in the model, what we actually have, and the difference there. So I think that's out there. When you look at money that is allocated for staffing statewide, I think we shared this with the recalibration committee, that 97% of the funds allocated for teaching are spent on teachers. It's just that we don't hire as many teachers as the model says that we should, but we do spend that money on teachers. I want to talk just a little bit about reserves. Reserves are just like the state. I can tell you, being in 2 different districts, that reserves are there to get you through the times when you do not get any money. So we are a district that receives money from the state during the school year. During the summer, we do not receive money from the state, so we do need money in our reserves to cash roll until we can get to August and get money from the state again. So that's one way here. In Campbell County, we were a recapture district, and we did not get money until the county treasurer gave us money. And so about May, we would have to bankroll and have our cash reserves. We'd get almost down to zero until we could get the money from our county treasurer when all of the money came in for taxes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And again, I want to talk about the basket of goods and my understanding of where the legislature is based on the Campbell cases. My understanding is the legislature gets to decide on the basket of goods. Then they get a cost out that basket of goods. You use people that are out there that are experts to do that. This time it was Picus and Auden. In 2017, it was APA. I believe both of those are to be go through efficiencies while they're costing out the basket of goods. If I remember right, Picus and Auden this year during recalibration costed out at about $20 million more than what the current model was. And if I remember right, in 2017, APA costed out at about $76 million more than it was what it cost at that time. One of the things that we asked, that you're asking about, how come costs keep going up when student numbers don't go up? I think one of the big cost drivers there is health insurance. And as all of you are aware, being part of the Senate Education Committee, we use the state health insurance as a proxy for how much our health insurance goes up. So again, I think that's one of the big drivers there. And we try to do what we can there. With that, I'll end my testimony. I know you're short on time and answer any questions you might have.
Seeing none, LSO, is that everybody, or we got somebody else yet?
I believe we have someone else. Mr. Franz Fuchs, did you want to testify?
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, members of the committee. My name is Franz Fuchs. I'm a policy analyst at the Department of Health. You might be wondering why the health department has any comment on this bill, and I'll keep my remarks pretty short. We are specifically looking at page 61 and 62 of the bill, which directs the state health officer to essentially serve as a review on excess reimbursement for special education. And as you might imagine, we have a couple of concerns about that. We would, just briefly, we'd ask that we can persuade you maybe to pin the rose on somebody else or fund or resource this kind of job appropriately, because the state health officer, while she has a wealth of experience in infectious disease, special education is not really our forte. And we would likely be hiring this kind of function out to outside consultants in a similar way that health utilization or utilization management is done for Medicaid. With that, sir, I'm happy to explain kind of why we see this as kind of a bigger job than just reviewing a couple pieces of paper. But I recognize you guys are short on time, so happy to stop here too.
We could go into considerable detail about the need for medical knowledge in making some of these decisions in special education, but I'm going to short circuit this and say, don't worry about it. Go worry about what the Appropriations Committee bill on Medicaid is going to do. In view of that bill, we're going to remove that particular part from this legislation, I think. So appreciate your comments, but I think we're going to make them academic.
Aye, sir.
Okay. Any questions for Franz? Franz, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We will talk to you more in the future on this if we get back into this sort of thing. Committee, we are going to run out of time shortly. I'm going to just briefly start through the amendments, and then we'll do the rest of them on Wednesday. And Wednesday, we will be under the time pressure to get it out. Unfortunately, this session, with the constitutional limitations and the problems COVID has created, is going to go very, very rapidly. I'm going to let us go in just a few minutes. The first one was largely, it's Amendment 3001, and they aren't in any particular order. I think they're in the order that LSO got them done, rather than any order through the bill or anything else. First one they say is largely technical corrections. There is one item in it that is distinctly not a technical correction. And that is page 54, lines 8 through 22, delete entirely. That gets rid of one of the complaints that we have heard in the public testimony that I think a number of us on the committee shared, and that is the across-the-board cut. That, frankly, I put that in the bill because I wasn't sure what the political situation was going to be, and it was in the, at $100 million, it was in the official recalibration committee's bill. The House, I think, has subsequently removed it or removed a major part of it. We left it in as $1 million so that it would be in the bill if this became the backup. And people were really enthusiastic about doing it that way. I think we have a constitutional right to do it as we balance all the needs of taxation and spending for education. That is something that is our charge under the Constitution and under the Republican form of government clause that we're bound by. But I don't like the procedure at all. And I think that may be shared. So this is not strictly a technical amendment. It does get rid of that particular provision. I'll do one more. The next one is the amendment number 2. You get my notes here. It's what that one does. It implements the going to a single year with the, instead of the 3-year rolling average. And it goes back and avoids using the COVID year because we know that has had some wild implications on all kinds of things, including enrollment, and is not a reliable baseline year. So that's what that particular amendment does. It's both of those things. Questions on that amendment? Okay, at that point, we're down to less than 10 minutes before the session starts, and we've got all kinds of other obligations upstairs. So we will resume. We will go through the rest of those amendments, and I did pass them out to everybody. I don't know whether the committee will come up with some more. These are ones we knew of, and they don't quite match the sheet that I passed out that show all the cuts. We've changed a few things, and frankly, with the time pressures, we're doing our best to get you the information, but it isn't perfect. So be warned about that. Okay? Thank you very much, committee.